He caught me dancing with his deaf twins in the kitchen. I thought I was done, finished, bag packed before the song even ended. Instead, the whole house woke up like someone cracked a window in a sealed room and let the air back in. If you've ever walked into a place that told you without a word to be smaller, you'll understand my first day behind the iron gates of the Carter estate. The guard scanned my paperwork, then scanned my face a second longer than necessary, like being me needed extra approval. "Are you here for a delivery?" he asked, polite, firm, certain. I kept my voice steady because steady is how you survive. "I'm the new housekeeper," I said. "Aaliyah James." Inside, the hallways smelled like waxed wood and old money. Every corner was pressed and polished, no fingerprints, no toys, no laughter, just quiet lined up like crystal. Mrs. Whitman, the head housekeeper, moved like a metronome and spoke like a rulebook. "This house requires order and quiet," she said, tapping a schedule board with no blank squares, like the walls would collapse if 1 minute went unassigned. "No experiments, Miss James. No attention. Do your job and keep the peace. You ever been told to keep your joy down because someone else is afraid of it?" Yeah, that happened. At noon, I met the twins, Noah and Ethan, 3 years old, born deaf. Their mother Emily gone the day they arrived. Their father, William Carter, worth more than the house could hold, but grief had turned him into a man who stood at thresholds and never walked in. The boys sat small and tight at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around their ribs, like they were holding in the last bit of warmth. I washed my hands, dried them slow, reached into my cloth bag and set a little speaker on the counter. I kept the volume low, so low, the table hummed more than the air did. Aretha Franklin, because soul has a way of finding bodies that forgot they had one. I didn't expect magic. I swayed my shoulders a little, tapped a foot, drew a beat with my hands so they could see rhythm instead of hear it. Ethan's heel bounced. Noah looked up wary, curious, like he was asking permission from a room that had only ever told him no. Then it happened, small but bright. A giggle, one note like a spark catching dry wood. "If it were you, what would you have done? Apologize and shut it off or lean in?" I leaned in. I crouched to their eye level, shaped the word gentleman. With my lips threaded their wrists with air ribbons only kids can feel, guiding, not pushing. Ethan stood wobbling, brave. Noah grabbed my apron like it was the rail of a ship learning to sail. The laughter didn't explode, it spread, bouncing off tile and copper, climbing brick like ivy until the kitchen sounded like a heart coming back online. I felt him before I saw him. Weather changes like that. William stood in the doorway with a folder he had come to fetch, and that hand, the one that signs contracts and keeps the world in line, loosened like hope hurt to hold. His boys were laughing, moving, feeling music with their bones. I saw his jaw work the way a man chews a memory he thought he'd swallowed. Mrs. Whitman appeared behind him, with her mouth pressed thin. "Miss James, do not turn this kitchen into a stage," she said. I lowered the volume, but I didn't put the music away. "Some flames you cup with both hands." When the song ended, Ethan wrapped my leg. Noah took his brother's hand. For a second, I felt like a late guest at a party I had set up but hadn't been invited to. "Thank you," William said, not sure to whom. Outside, the trees stirred. Inside, something cracked open. Not a flood. A leak. Enough light to see the next step. The next morning, he came down early, hair uncombed, shirt half-buttoned, coffee steaming like a shield. His voice tried to be hard, because fear always borrows steel. "Miss James, what exactly were you trying to do with my children yesterday? Joy is not part of the treatment plan." I set the paring knife down and faced him full on. "Mr. Carter, Joy is what they've been starved of, I said. The room tightened like a pulled string. Do you think that's fair, asking kids to heal without giving them anything to live for? He talked structure therapy schedules like grief could be balanced like a ledger. I said yes, they need that. And they also need to live. I'm not replacing your doctors. I'm clearing a path so they'll want to step forward. He didn't like being challenged by someone in an apron, someone the guard had assumed delivered packages, someone he could send home with a signature. He turned away, not because I was wrong, but because he wasn't ready to be right. So I worked. I turned shirts into puppets with lopsided voices. Sweeping became a relay race and the broom a baton. Dishwashing became a bubble carnival, planets floating, popping, and the boys chased those tiny worlds like joy owed them back pay. Laughter trickled along the banister like morning light, and from the upstairs landing, he watched pride and envy sharing the same coat. Why could this woman, the one people misnamed on purpose, unlock a door specialists couldn't even find? He stayed on the threshold anyway, teaching himself to breathe with laughter without admitting that he was learning. One afternoon, a picture frame slid out from under a cabinet while I was fishing for a runaway toy. Dust covered the glass. I wiped it clean, and there she was. Emily. Bright eyes, smile, tilted sunlight trapped in a woman's face. I didn't put the frame back on the high shelf like a trophy you never touch. I set it low where the boys live. The next morning, Noah found her the way people find a memory they weren't supposed to forget. He pressed his palm to the glass, turned to Ethan, and spread his fingers into a clumsy sign. Mama. I didn't rush in with words. I knelt, laid a hand gently between their shoulders, and let memory do the speaking. William walked in and flinched like someone knocked from the inside of his chest. He went to his knees, voice cracking, "Yes, that's your mother." Noah beamed like a light came on behind his eyes. Ethan leaned into his father's shoulder, and I stepped a half pace back so the moment could breathe, so my body wouldn't block what belonged to them. You know what I mean. Some scenes are sacred because you choose not to stand in front of them. Not everyone understood. That evening, a neighbor brought pastries and called me the nanny like she needed a smaller box for a bigger truth. I smiled because you have to pick your battles. But when she left, I stood at the window a long time measuring my place in a house that could hold a piano and still forget music. That night, I washed the last glass, turned out the light, and walked a dim hallway that looked expensive but felt empty. My notebook was full of arrows and hand sketches. After my shift, I watched videos and learned the first ASL words kids reach for. Play. Happy. Love. The next morning, I laid that notebook on the rug and signed slow, clear, letting my hands say what my heart had been shouting. Play. Happy. Love. The boys' brows furrowed, then their fingers tried. Then we laughed when our hands tangled, laughing like hikers who turn a corner and find the path they were sure didn't exist. He leaned in the doorway again, curious, guarded, pretending he wasn't both. I nodded an invitation without a speech. He stepped onto the edge of the rug like it might swallow him. His hands had only signed numbers, deals, the kind of words that never say, "I'm scared." They trembled. He breathed. Then he signed one word he had never dared. Papa. The room cracked open with a silence that rang like a bell. And the boys clapped their chests, grabbed his arms, and for a second, all the years he had stood outside his own life fell off his shoulders. A message blinked across his phone. Dr. Harold Stein would be visiting that afternoon. I gathered toys. William buttoned his collar all the way up. He lined the boys neatly on the sofa, like hope was something you prepare for a test. Dr. Stein arrived on time with a folder and a polite nod that placed me outside his circle without him having to say it. Thank you for your support, Miss James. Support like a feather that somehow weighs a ton. Can you show the doctor your new signs? William asked, voice bright like forced sunlight. Noah raised his hand, saw the stranger's measuring eyes, and froze. Ethan pressed his face into my apron, where soap and garlic and the life we were trying to cook lingered. Silence. Come on, son, William said, too quick. Dr. Stein wrote notes, calm, clinical. In play settings, children often imitate. That does not necessarily equate to meaningful progress. I'm glad the family is having quality time, but please don't confuse feelings with developmental milestones. Don't confuse feelings. Those words lowered the temperature by 10 degrees. He closed his folder. Thank you. He left. The door clicked like a verdict you can't appeal. William stood heavy with shame and needed somewhere to put it. I was closest. You gave me an illusion, he said, jaw tight. Anyone can make kids laugh. When it matters, they go silent again. I straightened. Here, faith is what keeps them alive, I said. Reports don't teach a child to wait their turn, to meet someone's eyes, to name what they feel. I'm not replacing doctors. I open the door so they want to walk through. He looked away because pain is louder than truth when you're used to listening to it. He didn't ban the music with words. He folded it away with silence. The house slid into winter. The kind of winter that makes your coat feel like a lie. I did everything on time exactly right, every corner tight, every dish stacked perfect, and laughter ebbed like a tide. The boys clung to me, more eyes asking if the grown-ups had changed their minds about hope. William locked himself in his study, touching files and putting them down like ritual could fix what love was asking him to risk. I won't lie, I almost packed my bag. But a door had cracked and I knew I'd regret leaving before it opened. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. Thursday evening, orange lights spilling in like honey. I pushed my cloth bag onto a chair while I set the table. The corner of the little speaker peeked out like a secret that wanted to live. Noah spotted it. He tugged it free, steady hands for a small boy. Ethan pressed the button, and the bass rolled across the tile like thunder you feel in your feet. They looked at me, then they turned to the doorway, raised their hands and signed together. Dance. Then again, slow brave. Dance, Papa. The house went still the way glass sounds when it cracks. William stood in the doorway, the same threshold, where he had practiced survival for 3 years. I saw pride. I saw fear. I saw how much easier it is to keep control than to choose love. But the invitation was louder than his doubt. He stepped forward. He lowered himself to their height. His shoulders shook. His feet tapped. His body spoke the apology his mouth couldn't yet form. I stepped aside because center stage belonged to father and sons. Laughter rose clean and bright like sunlight breaking the last sheet of river ice. When the song ended, he sat on the small step between kitchen and dining room and put his face in his hands. I poured water. We didn't fill the quiet with talk. Sometimes silence is the truest language in the room. Later, he knocked on my door, the kind of knock a person gives when he has decided to tell the truth. He handed me a letter he had written to Emily on the twins' first night home when they cried until morning, and grief felt like an unwanted tenant who would never move out. He wrote that he wasn't enough, that he might never be enough, that his children would grow up in a house where no one spoke their language. I read slow, letting him breathe between lines. When I finished, I put the letter back in his hand. Emily would be proud you stayed, I said. He didn't cry. He softened. There is a difference. The next morning, Mike the driver walked in for coffee while the boys swayed to the soft beat and said, "Beautiful dancing, Miss James must be lively in your neighborhood." My smile faltered. William stepped in, voice clear. "Here she's the one who brought my children back." Mike stammered an apology. Usually those little cuts vanish into the rug. Not this time. This time someone chose a side out loud. Nights later, the kitchen glowed again. We taped a finish line across the tile. We raced brooms. Noah won. Ethan laughed, wrapped his arm around his brother, and I signed one word to William, while the twins clapped like small thunder. "Continue." He signed back with hands that finally belonged to his sons, as much as they belonged to his business. Together. A soft morning came with a kind wind. I planted small sticks along a grass path and tied colorful ribbons that would flutter like tiny flags. I signed, "Follow the colors one step, then another." Ethan went first, arms wide for balance, fearless because someone believed in him. Noah moved slower, looking up to check if he could keep going. Thumbs up. He fell, brushed off, kept moving. I signed. "Strong, continue proud." He stopped midway, turned to his father, lifted his small hands, and signed slow. "Go, Papa." 2 words, like a bridge over a river that had flooded their home since the day they were born. William ran. He ran like slowing down might make the bridge disappear. He knelt and pulled both boys in, and all the tears, the old ones, the new ones, came at once. I pressed my hand to my chest and stood back so the light could do its work. Time started behaving again. Stairs wore streaks of color. Toy cars hid in couch cushions. Handprints marked the windows like evidence that life lived here. William sat cross-legged on the floor, reading stories with his hands learning to wait, when the boys searched for a sign, laughing in the ordinary way that tells you the war inside a man has decided to rest. He planned a small gathering in the garden. Not a gala, not a show, just neighbors, a couple of therapists, people who had stood with them, even when they weren't sure which direction was forward. The boys moved through the guests like little teachers. They signed short phrases. They waited for answers. They took turns without reminders. They labeled feelings and handed them over like gifts that didn't need wrapping. Eyes widened, then softened, then smiled. Dr. Stein arrived late. He stood quietly long enough to see Noah hand Ethan a block, and wait long enough to see Ethan sign love with both arms around his father's neck, long enough to understand that some data points are written in the way people treat each other when no one is measuring. He exhaled, stepped toward William, and said, "I've been overly cautious. What I've seen tonight, it matters." He didn't apologize to me, not with words, but he looked at my hands when I signed thank you, and sometimes that is how people start. Victoria, the neighbor with the pastries and the small boxes for big truths, arrived with a tray of tarts. She watched the twins show another child how to sign thank you, then turned to me and said, "You're the cook, right? Very skillful." The words fell heavy. A few guests glanced over. I opened my mouth to be gracious and tired, but William spoke first. "This is Aaliyah James," he said, clear, steady. "She's not just the cook. She's the one who brought my children back, and she brought me back to them." The air shifted temperature. Victoria apologized. I nodded and signed thank you, and for once the thank you landed where it belonged. We spread a blanket under the big tree as the sun slid down. The 4 of us sat close. We ate crooked cookies the boys had shaped with serious hands. Ethan offered the bigger piece to Noah. Noah split it even because fairness is a language you teach by doing. William whispered something that made me laugh from a place I had kept locked. My laugh folded into the sound of crickets and small boys humming with a music you feel more than hear. Family right there. Not a portrait on a high shelf. Not a schedule on a board. Presence. Language. Repair. Standing up after you fall. Now the part people debate. Love didn't replace Emily. It never could. I am not their mother. I am not an angel. I am a woman who showed up, learned a language, and kept showing up when winter tried to move back in. William looked at his sons, then at me, then at his hands, and he signed love with fingers that had finally learned what work they were made for. Here's the twist under the twist. The week after the garden, a consultant from the foundation, William Chairs, called about expanding funding for early childhood programs. He wanted measurable outcomes, only nothing soft, nothing you couldn't print in columns. William told him a story about a boy who waited his turn without being told, about a father stepping off the threshold and onto the rug, about a house that remembered how to breathe. The man said, "That's moving, but how do we chart it?" William said, "Maybe we chart it by raising men who don't need a chart to believe what they see." The phone went quiet. Progress sometimes looks like telling a system it has missed the point. So let me ask you, how would you measure a child learning to say love with his hands? How would you measure a father choosing humility instead of pride? Do you think it's fair that joy gets treated like extra credit because it's messy and can't be graphed? If it were you, would you have told me to turn off the music, or would you have stepped into the dance and risked looking foolish in your own kitchen? He caught me dancing with his deaf twins. That's the headline. The story is that a house decided to live again. That a man brave enough to keep breathing learned to be brave enough to feel. That a pair of boys found language in vibration and light and the shape of a hand saying, "I see you." And me, the woman at the gate, asked if I had a delivery, the one some folks tried to rename because names carry power. I didn't replace the past. I opened a door, kept the music low, invited people through, and stepped back so the light could find the ones who needed it most. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Noah signing mama at a picture finally lowered to his eye level. William's hands shaking as he signed papa on the rug, or the twins raising their arms and asking dance papa until pride sat down. If you were Dr. Stein, would you have said, "Don't confuse feelings," or would you have let what you saw move you sooner? If you've been put in a smaller box than you deserve, how did you step out and keep your heart soft? Drop your thoughts in the comments, argue with me if you need to share this with someone who thinks joy is optional, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Like the video, if this gave you something you needed, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and if you've got a moment that changed your house the way this changed ours, tell it. Your voice matters here. Your questions matter. Your story might be the music someone is waiting to feel.